Well, hello everyone. I'm Sam, and you are listening to Literacy, where I'm opening up with the radio. Hello everyone. Hi. I'm doing the radio voice in the start. Hi. How's it going? Yeah. How are we? Hello. Good evening, or afternoon, or morning, or good night, wherever it is for you in the world. Alberto, this is your first time watching Desert Bus. It's a lot of fun. Well, good. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. Like, I actually. Okay, right, hang on. Okay, I'll start. Oh my goodness, right. Someone keep notes of all the different tangents we've already established. Hi, I'm Sam. I will be reading for you tonight, but we'll get to that in a bit. This is Literacy, where we read books on the internet for you to listen to. I have a cat named Joey who has just heard me speaking in the room. And rather than recording and looping it over and over and over again, he just comes over to cuddle instead. This is an art reference. And yes, I and a number of us, I guess, in chat, have been watching Desert Bus for Hope this week, which has left its... Yeah, I know, you included. There you go, kisses. First tangent, I am indeed me. Desert Bus for Hope, the charity marathon that we raided over to last Saturday, where they... Excuse me, sorry, I completely forgot I had a mute button and just burped. They play a very bad video game round the clock for as long as people keep donating money, with, you know, compound interest on things. They've it's literally just 7%. The first hour is $1. And the 168th hour is like $56,000 or $70,000, I forget what. So, you know, they do that for a week, and it's round the clock, and I'm a sucker for anything that is live and constant around the clock. So it means absolute devastation to my sleep schedule. I left you on a bus, and you didn't know how you get off it. Well, it is inevitable that the bus will stop. So you're in good hands. That's fine. But yeah, I was trying to work out earlier when I started watching, because I've known about it for years. I've known about it since the very first one, because I was a member of the Penny Arcade community, and Child's Play Charity was a thing established by Penny Arcade, and there was a good bit of like community crossover between Loading Ready Run and Penny Arcade at the time. And so when they started doing it, it was like, oh, there's this like Canadian comedy troupe who are playing Desert Bus. It's this really bad game where you drive a bus through the desert, and they're just doing that as long as people give them money to raise money for Child's Play. Go watch it. And this is before Twitch. This is before streaming videos on the internet was easily done. You had to duct tape together a few things to make that work, and so I'd kind of tune in, but I didn't really have any point of reference. I didn't know who they were to any degree, or I didn't have any like investment in it, so I kind of wasn't that fussed about watching it and be like, oh yeah, it's really cool, but I wasn't into it, you know. And you know, it became an annual event, and every year I'd hear about it and be like, oh, maybe I'll watch a bit of it this year. Not really. Again, nothing would really stick, and it was only let's see now, like 6-7 years ago, I think, that I properly started watching LRR's content. And now that they've been going for 20 years, that's actually, you know, a significant amount of time ago. But at the time, you know, I was a new kid watching the stuff, like, oh yeah, this is really cool. And it still took like another year or so for me to actually sit down and watch Desert Bus and get into it, because by that point, after like a year or two of watching their stuff, I was then, oh okay, it's these people, and they're not going to be putting anything out on their regular content on their regular spaces for this week. I guess I go and watch them do a bit of Desert Bus, and that's when I suddenly got hooked and invested and started buying t-shirts. And yeah, I think the first t-shirt I've got is from 2018. Yes, Ray Tracer. I think they literally just celebrated their 20th anniversary this year. Which, because that's the weird thing of like, I don't think of them as being, like, I know that the majority of the founding members are about my age, everyone's kind of in my kind of in my sort of age group. There's most of them are, you know, a few months or a year younger than me, and there's a few that are a year older than me, but it's basically the same level as me. And so it's like, wow, you've been going for 20 years. Yeah, because they started in like university. Like, yeah, oh yeah, that was 20 years ago. Oh no. So yeah, it's kind of odd, but very cool. And here's to 20 more. Hey, everyone to whom that was a blow, take your ibuprofen now. Yeah, like exactly, love. It's also like Desert Bus itself has been going for 17 years. This is Desert Bus 17. But it's weird to me now that this stuff is actually... I realise now I sound like my parents. And I was like, oh wow, colour television. Like, I think internet streaming, live streaming, and all this sort of video content just being freely posted online from so many different sources is my colour television. Like, that's the thing that I think of as brand new and still like, oh wow, yeah, it's really weird and cool that everyone can do this. And like, mate, it's been here for 20 years. It's, yeah, I don't know, it's odd. A friend of yours watches LRR a lot, so it feels weird to LRR. He was pleasantly surprised that you're watching Desert Bus. Neat. Yeah, you said you enjoyed it, I think, and I'm really glad you did. I probably picked up by now, I love sharing my interests with people, and there's no condition or expectation that when I share something that I like, the other person has to like it. But if you do, if I give someone a recommendation, like, hey, watch this, or if we raid a channel that I enjoy, and someone comes back and goes, yeah, I really like that. That was good, thank you. It's a nice feeling. So yeah, I'm really glad. We are now our parents in the 90s still being impressed with big screen TVs, right? Like, that's just hitting home now that that's who I am and who we are. So, oh boy. But yes, Desert Bus for Hope 2023 has literally just concluded a few minutes ago, which is why we're starting a little bit late, because almost mercifully for us and our schedule, chat didn't tip them over to 168 hours and give them the full, literal, exact week. They came in an hour short, which gives them a nice goal for next year. But they still managed like 1.19 million raised, which, yeah, is kind of absurd. Like, I'm pretty sure when all the money comes in, it's all totaled up, they're going to have a new record over previous years, which is wild. And what else was I going to say? Yeah, I realised as well, nothing to sneeze at. Yes, that was Joey sneezing. He has now hopped down off my leg. When I started watching, their big goal then was passing 5 million lifetime. Like, I remember watching that, and that was kind of a big moment that I got hooked on. I was like, ooh, I like this. I like this shared experience of everyone pulling together, comrade. But everyone like just pulling together to achieve these goals and make a significant dent on the state of the world to do something better. And seeing... Okay, Joey, 1 second. Let's do something better for you. And yeah, sort of witnessing that is quite impactful, even if I don't have anywhere near the kind of money, you know, like... You've got people just casually, as they put it, emptying their war chests at the end and dropping like $6,000. And like that would make a that amount of money would make a significant difference to my life to have. I can't afford that. I can chip in like a little bit here and there and chuck in a 778 for a Jack's donation, or chuck in, you know, a little bit now and then for a giveaway. But yeah, I'm not one of the ones that's getting their name called out for, whoa, that's a huge amount of money. But it's just nice to be a part of something like that, like to feel a part of it and to find this sort of community group doing something big and cool and neat. And it's always infectious, and it's always kind of inspiring it makes me want to do stuff like that, even though I wouldn't know where to start with trying to organise it. Like we did that one on the John's channel a few years ago now, back in the first year of lockdown, I want to say, where we did our charity marathon, which was really good and would be lovely to do again sometime, but you know, it's a big ask. It's cool though, technology is cool, as long as we don't build the Torment Nexus from the book, don't build the Torment Nexus. Yeah, but what if though? Because, you know, I'm a big fan of John Torment Nexus, and this is the kind of car that he would have driven. Boy, a Cybertruck is a joke, isn't it? Probably you've had it on a lot while doing other things, so you haven't paid perfect attention that much. But that's the thing, it's good background attention. What I tend to do is, yeah, I'll like stick it on, probably playing a game, or trying to work and failing to work. And then I'll hear a burst of laughter and quickly look over to like catch the highlights. Andy Pants, you didn't watch much beyond the longest John's call in? Fair. Just because you don't know who many of these people are or much of what's going on, and you don't have the energy to get invested, so it's the sort of thing. But it's the sort of thing you're very glad it exists. Like that's where I started. Again, it would get to this time of year and kind of people and communities in my orbit, that I was in the orbit of, I would say, would start talking about it and getting excited about it, and I'd be like, oh, okay, I guess I'll tune in and watch it. And yeah, it took a while for me to actually, and by a while I mean like literally in terms of consecutive years of doing this, to actually get stuck, in a sense. Yeah, and that, like my path there. Don't worry, we're not reading anything tonight. It's fine. We're just talking about Desert Bus. My path to that, I think, came largely via. There's a show that they used to do regularly on Loading Ready Run, which they're sort of bringing back as and when they can. That is called Watch and Play. The conceit being, there's two of them, Graham and Alex. Graham, who's kind of one of the leading figureheads, founding members, very much a frequent frontman of LRR stuff. He finds the bad games from the internet and makes Alex play them. And that's really how I ended up watching their stuff. That was like my way in. It's like, oh, well, I like these people, and this show is funny, where they play bad games and both laugh at them but also critique them. And boy, there are some terrible, terrible games out there. And that was really how I ended up watching that. And that was sort of my way into the rest of the stuff. That was like the tip of the wedge. Yeah, Josh, you've come into bus talk. Hunk. But, I mean, I'm not trying to like, oh, you're here now, great, I'm going to cut it off. I will read a story because I do have stuff planned tonight. But first of all, this is important. Hey, look, a sub. Congratulations to me. I got to them through Friday nights. I don't think I've ever really properly watched Friday nights, because yeah, like Magic the Gathering is not. I play it, and I enjoy it, but it's not like a significant part of my life, and so I don't go looking for like Magic the Gathering content. So yeah, that wasn't really my vector. Big internet Twitch charity event in France called Z Event. President Macron tweeted about it this year. He got ratioed to hell. Great, good, nice. Sorry, my tea's gone cold. I'm wondering why I got out of bed at all. It's evening, so there's no morning rain to cloud up my window. It's green tea. It's fine. It's still actually quite nice. What? No, it's Stan. Actually, is the name of the. That was Stan by Dido. So, let the room go quiet and loudly sip tea into the microphone. I mean, I'm going to finish this before I start reading, because otherwise it will just be stone cold before I get going. Right, there we go. Oddly sweet at the end, actually. Not sure. There. Not sure about that. Right. Hello, everyone. I'm Sam, and tonight we have. I also have a link for this. The Boats of the Glen Carrig, which will be written by William Hope Hodgson just as soon as he gets around to it. There we go. There is your link in chat. So the version I have in hand it's another quite cheap copy. I'm like, it's not quite as brazen and egregious, I would say, as the Algernon Blackwood one that I've got. That's just a photograph, like a badly JPEG compressed photograph of the front cover of the Penguin copy slapped on a very cheaply printed one. But it is still very obviously a photo of a faded, like an actual faded cover of a properly printed copy of the book, put on sort of a very thin, fancy leaflet version. It's fine. I just prefer to read a physical copy than off the screen. But what I noticed is missing is there's like a little bit of an introduction that Hodgson has written, and then there's a small poem. I don't know if it's originally his, because he did write poetry, or whether it's from somewhere else, which is not in my copy of the book. And if you're gonna do this, if you're gonna just like Control A, Control C, Control V, print, make money, then at least include everything. Don't cut stuff out. But yeah, so I'll read that off the screen. Yeah, this is the boat, the Glen Carrig. It is seemingly part one of what was it? The something trilogy. Trilogy of the Abyss. That's the one. Slightly abridged version. Yeah, ever so slightly. Just here to stop by since you're probably going to be back to sleeping. Fair, completely. Prematurely woke up at the tail end of Coffee Pong, so you stayed for the end. Yeah, it's good to see you, Josh. Take care. Sleep well, indeed. And to everyone that has sabotaged their sleep schedule this week, good luck getting it back on track. Traditionally, just to go back to Desert Bus, sorry everyone. Traditionally, when it gets to the last day, I will try to stay up through the night and watch things, because I don't want to be asleep when it ends. And then there was a point last night that I realised, oh no, the current projected end time is like 6 PM for me, so I'm not going to do that. So I went to bed at the end of Night Watch, which was still a bad decision. That was like 8 AM when that finished, and that was when I went to bed. And woke up sort of about the end of Zeta, I think, which, it was about 2 PM. So I kind of had 8 hours sleep, but it's not a very good 8 hours sleep, and my head does not feel good for it. So, which does bring us back to the story that I may have a little bit of trouble focusing on some of the words on this page, because it's quite small print. But we'll see. I have my extra lights drafted in, so we'll do what we can. But yes, this is the boat to the Glen Carrig. It is the first part of the trilogy of the Abyss, as I believe it is known. Small print, you are old and you hate it. Yeah, me too. Not a fan. I'm past the point of pride of like, no, I must read the small print like it's some kind of feat that I can boast about. Like, no, just give me words I can read, please. What was I saying? Yeah, so far what I've read of this, which you'll be hearing today, has good, strong vibes of the nautical horror stuff that we have read from Hodgson already on stream. Things like, what was it? The Voice in the Night. A little bit Out of the Storm and Tropical Horror. Those ones. So if you enjoyed those, you're in for more of that, but in novel form. Which is, how original. But yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think if there's any more introduction or bits to say. I've probably left a few tangents hanging, but you've had glasses since you were 5. No pride here. Fair, yeah. Probably you enjoyed those. This is exciting. Yeah, good. I was hoping for that. Apparently the the writing changes a bit between them. So this first one is, well, I'll get to it in a second, I suppose, because it is literally covered in the text, like what this is and who it's from. But it's kind of like it's an account from someone who has been through it, delivering it to someone else. So it's told from that kind of perspective. Of, you know, me and the boys did this, and then this happened, and then we went here and did this, and you know, it's sort of talk, like it's like you're listening to an old grandpa recounting tales from his more daring days, and I believe that perspective shifts for the second one. But yeah, I'm intending to do all three. Whether I do them all before handing novels back over to Lucy, I don't know. We shall see. But yeah, I've sat here and talked for quite a while, so I guess I might as well put my head down and start a story. So, without any further ado or preamble, as I say, your link is up at the top. This is The Boats of the Glen Carrig by William Hope Hodgson. Being an account of their adventures in the strange places of the earth. Joey is at the door. 1 second. Hi. It's like, you know, as soon as I'm trying to do a thing, it's like, you know, hey, buddy. Yeah, scream. Being an account of their adventures in strange places of meow. Joey's at the door. It's a weird book. Like, yeah, Hodgson was strangely prescient. Right, you want to be on my lap? Okay, then I'm going to have to sit like this. This is fine. This is almost comfortable. He lied. Right, let's start again. The Boats of the Glen Carrig by William Hope Hodgson. Being an account of their adventures in the strange places of the earth after the foundering of the good ship Glen Carrig, through striking upon a hidden rock in the unknown seas to the southward, as told by John Winterstraw, to his son James Winterstraw in the year 1757, and by him committed very properly and legibly to manuscript. By William Hope Hodgson, 1907. You can probably hear Joey purring very loudly. It's going to be an informal one tonight. Madre mia. People may say that thou art no longer young, and yet, to me, thy youth was yesterday, a yesterday that seems still mingled with my dreams. Ah, how the years have o'er thee flung their soft mantilla grey. And e'en to them thou art not over old. How couldst thou be? Thy hair hast scarcely lost its deep old glorious dark, thy face is scarcely lined, no mark destroys its calm serenity. Like gold of evening light when winds scarce stir, the soul light of thy face is pure as prayer. Chapter 1. The Land of Lonesomeness. Now we had been 5 days in the boats, and in all this time made no discovering a land. Then, upon the morning of the 6th day, there came a cry from the boatswain, who had the command of the lifeboat, that there was something which might be land far upon our larboard bow, but it was lying very low, and none could tell whether it was land or but a morning cloud. Yet, because there was the beginning of hope within our hearts, we pulled wearily towards it, and thus, in about an hour, discovered it to be indeed the coast of some flat country. Then, it might be a little after the hour of midday, we had come so close to it that we could distinguish with ease what manner of land lay beyond the shore, and thus we found it to be of an abominable flatness, desolate beyond all that I could have imagined. Here and there it appeared to be covered with clumps of queer vegetation, though whether they were small trees or great bushes I had no means of telling. But this I know, that they were like unto nothing which ever I had set eyes upon before. So much as this I gathered as we pulled slowly along the coast, seeking an opening whereby we could pass inward to the land. But a weary time passed ere we came upon that which we sought. Yet, in the end, we found it. A slimy banked creek, which proved to be the estuary of a great river, though we spoke of it always as a creek. Into this we entered, and proceeded at no great pace upwards along its winding course. And as we made forward, we scanned the low banks upon each side. Perchance there might be some spot where we could make to land, but we found none, the banks being composed of vile mud which gave us no encouragement to venture rashly upon them. Now, having taken the boat something over a mile up the great creek, we came upon the first of that vegetation which I had chanced to notice from the sea, and here, being within some score yards of it, we were the better able to study it. Thus I found that it was indeed composed largely of a sort of tree, very low and stunted, and having what might be described as an unwholesome look about it. The branches of this tree I perceived to be the cause of my inability to recognise it from a bush, until I had come close upon it, for they grew thin and smooth through all their length, and hung towards the earth, being weighted thereto by a single large cabbage-like plant which seemed to sprout from the extreme tip of each. Presently, having passed beyond this clump of the vegetation, and the banks of the river remaining very low, I stood me upon a thwart, by which means I was enabled to scan the surrounding country. This I discovered, so far as my sight could penetrate, to be pierced in all directions with innumerable creeks and pools, some of these latter being very great of extent. And, as I have before made mention, everywhere the country was low set, as it might be a great plain of mud, so that it gave me a sense of dreariness to look out upon it. It may be, all unconsciously, that my spirit was put in awe by the extreme silence of all the country around, for in all that waste I could see no living thing, neither bird nor vegetable, save it be the stunted trees, which, indeed, grew in clumps here and there over all the land, so much as I could see. This silence, when I grew fully aware of it, was the more uncanny, for my memory told me that never before had I come upon a country which contained so much quietness. Nothing moved across my vision, not even a lone bird soared up against the dull sky, and from a hearing not so much as the cry of a sea-bird came to me, no, nor the croak of a frog, nor the plash of a fish. It was as though we had come upon the country of silence, which some have called the land of lonesomeness. Now, 3 hours had passed whilst we ceased not to labour at the oars, and we could no more see the sea. Yet no place fit for our feet had come to view, and for everywhere the muds, grey and black, surrounded us, encompassing us veritably by a slimy wilderness. And so we were fain to pull on, in the hope that we might come ultimately to firm ground. Then, a little before sundown, we halted upon our oars and made a scant meal from a portion of our remaining provisions, and as we ate, I could see the sun sinking away over the waves, and had some slight diversion in watching the grotesque shadows from which it cast from the trees into the water upon our larboard side, for we had come to pause opposite a clump of the vegetation. It was at this time, I remember, that it was borne in upon me afresh how very silent was the land, and that this was not due to my imagination. I remarked that the men, both in our own and in the boatswain's boat, seemed uneasy because of it, for none spoke save in undertones, as though they had fear of breaking it. And it was at this time, when I was awed by so much solitude, that there came the first telling of life in that wilderness. I heard it first in the far distance, away inland. A curious, low, sobbing note it was, and the rise and fall of it was like the sobbing of a lonesome wind through a great forest. Yet there was no wind. Then, in a moment, it had died, and the silence of the land was awesome by reason of the contrast. And I looks about me at the men, both in the boat in which I was and that which the boatswain commanded, and not one was there but held himself in a posture of listening, In this wise, a minute of quietness passed, and then one of the men gave out a laugh, born of the nervousness which had taken him. The boatswain muttered to him to hush, and in the same moment there came the plaint of that wild sobbing, and abruptly it sounded away on our right, and immediately was caught up, as it were, and echoed back from some place beyond us, afar up the creek, and that I got me upon a thwart, intending to take another look over the country about us, but the banks of the creek had become higher. Moreover, the vegetation acted as a screen, even had my stature and elevation enabled me to overlook the banks. And so, after a little while, the crying died away, and there was another silence. Then, as we sat, each one harking for what might next befall, George, the youngest prentice boy, who had his seat beside me, plucked me by the sleeve, inquiring in a troubled voice whether I had any knowledge of that which the cry might portend. But I shook my head, telling him that I had no knowing beyond his own, though for his comfort I said it might be the wind. Yet at that he shook his head, for indeed it was plain it could not be by such agency, for there was a stark calm. Now, I had scarce made an end of my remark, when, again, the sad crying was upon us. It appeared to come from far up the creek, and from far down the creek, and from inland, and the land between us and the sea. It filled the evening air with its doleful wailing, and I remarked that there was in it a curious sobbing, most human in its despairful crying. And so awesome was the thing that no man of us spoke, for it seemed that we harked to the weeping of lost souls. And then, as we waited fearfully, the sun sank below the edge of the world, and the dusk was upon us. And now a more extraordinary thing happened, for, as the night fell with swift gloom, the strange wailing and crying was hushed, and another sound stole out upon the land, a far, sullen growling. At the first, like the crying, it came from far inland, but was caught up speedily on all sides of us, and presently the dark was full of it. And it increased in volume, and strange trumpetings fled across it. Then, though with slowness, it fell away to a low continuous growling, and in it there was that which I can only describe as an insistent, hungry snarl. Aye, no other word of which I have knowledge so well describes it as that, a note of hunger most awesome to the ear, and this, more than all the rest of those incredible voicings, brought terror into my heart. Now, as I sat listening, George gripped me suddenly by the arm, declaring in a shrill whisper that something had come among the clump of trees upon the left-hand bank. Of the truth of this I had immediately a proof, for I caught the sound of a continuous rustling among them, and then a nearer note of growling, as though a wild beast purred at my elbow. Immediately upon this I caught the boatswain's voice, calling in a low tone to Josh, the eldest prentice, who had the charge of our boat, to come alongside of him, for he would have the boats together. Then we got out the oars and laid the boats together in the midst of the creek, and so we watched through the night, being full of fear, so that we kept our speech low. That is, so low as would carry our thoughts one to the other through the noise of the growling. And so the hours passed, and naught happened more than I have told, save that once, a little after midnight, the trees opposite to us seemed to be stirred again, as though some creature or creatures lurked among them, and there came, a little after that, a sound as of something stirring the water up against the bank, but it ceased in a while, and the silence fell once more. Thus, after a weariful time, away eastwards, the sky began to tell of the coming of the day, and, as the light grew and strengthened, so did that insatiable growling pass hence with the dark and the shadows. And so at last came the day, and once more there was borne to us the sad wailing which had preceded the night. For a certain while it lasted, rising and falling most mournfully over the vastness of the surrounding wastes, until the sun was risen some degrees above the horizon. after which it began to fail, dying away in lingering echoes, most solemn to our ears. And so it passed, and there came again the silence that had been with us in all the daylight hours. Now, it being day, the boatswain bade us make such sparse breakfast as our provender allowed, after which, having first scanned the banks to discern if any fearful thing were visible, we took again to our oars and proceeded on our upward journey, for we hoped presently to come upon a country where life had not become extinct, and where we could put foot to honest earth. Yet, as I have made mention earlier, the vegetation, where it grew, did flourish most luxuriantly, so that I am scarce correct when I speak of life as being extinct in that land. For, indeed, now I think of it, I can remember that the very mud from which it sprang seemed veritably to have a fat, sluggish life of its own, so rich and viscid was it. Presently it was midday, yet was there but little change in the nature in the surrounding wastes, though it may be that the vegetation was somewhat thicker and more continuous along the banks. But the banks were still of the same thick, clinging mud, so that nowhere could we effect a landing, though, had we, the rest of the country beyond the banks seemed no better. And all the while, as we pulled, we glanced continuously from bank to bank, and those who worked not at the oars were fain to rest a hand by their sheath knives, for the happenings of the past night were continually in our minds, and we were in great fear, so that we had turned back to the sea, but that we had come so nigh to the end of our provisions. Chapter 2. The Ship in the Creek. Then it was nigh on to evening. We came upon a creek opening into the greater one through the bank upon our left. We had been like to pass it, as, indeed, we had passed many throughout the day, but that the boatswain, whose boat had the lead, cried out that there was some craft lying up, a little beyond the first bend. And, indeed, so it seemed, for one of the masts of her, all jagged where it had carried away, stuck up plain to our view. Now, having grown sick with so much lonesomeness, and being in fear of the approaching night, we gave out something near to a cheer, which, however, the boatswain silenced, having no knowledge of those who might occupy the stranger. And so, in silence, the boatswain turned his craft toward the creek, whereat we followed, taking heed to keep quietness and working the oars warily. So, in a little, we came to the shoulder of the bend, and had plain sight of the vessel some little way beyond us. From the distance she had no appearance of being inhabited, so that after some small hesitation we pulled towards her, though still being at pains to keep silence. The strange vessel lay against the bank of the creek which was upon our right, and over above her was a thick clump of the stunted trees. For the rest, she appeared to be firmly embedded in the heavy mud, and there was a certain look of age about her which carried to me a doleful suggestion that we should find naught aboard her fit for an honest stomach. We had come to a distance of maybe some 10 fathoms from her starboard bow, for she lay with her head down towards the mouth of the little creek, when the boatswain bade his men to back water, which Josh did regarding our own boat. Then, being ready to fly if we had been in danger, the boatswain hailed the stranger, but got no reply, save that some echo of his shout seemed to come back at us. And so we sung out again to her, chance there might be some below decks who had not caught his first hail. But, for the second time, no answer came to us, save the low echo. Naught but that the silent trees took on a little quivering, as though his voice had shaken them. At that, being confident now within our minds, we laid alongside, and, in a minute, had shinned up the oars and so gained the decks. Here, save that the glass of the skylight of the main cabin had been broken, and some portion of the framework shattered, there was no extraordinary litter, so that it appeared to us as though she had been no great while abandoned. So soon as the boatswain had made his way up from the boat, he turned aft toward the scuttle, the rest of us following. We found the leaf of the scuttle piled forward to within an inch of closing, and so much effort did it require of us to push it back that we had immediate evidence of a considerable time since any had gone down that way. However, it was no great while before we were below, and here we found the main cabin to be empty, save for the bare furnishings. From it there opened off 2 state-rooms at the forward end, and the captain's cabin in the after part, and in all of these we found matters of clothing and sundries such as proved that the vessel had been deserted apparently in haste. And further proof of this we found, in a drawer in the captain's room, a considerable quantity of loose gold, the which it was not to be supposed would have been left by the free will of the owner. Of the staterooms, the one upon the starboard side gave evidence that it had been occupied by a woman, no doubt a passenger. The other, in which there were 2 bunks, had been shared, so far as we could have any certainty, by a couple of young men, and this we gathered by observation of various garments which were scattered carelessly about. Yet it must not be supposed that we spent any great time in the cabins, for we were pressed for food and made haste, under the directing of the boatswain, to discover if the hulk held victuals whereby we might be kept alive. To this end, we removed the hatch which led down to the lazarette, and, lighting the lamps which we had with us in the boat, went down to make a search. And so, in a little while, we came upon 2 casks which the boatswain broke open with a hatchet. These casks were sound and tight, and in them was ship's biscuit, very good and fit for food. At this, as may be imagined, we felt ease in our minds, knowing that there was no immediate fear of starvation. Following this, we found a barrel of molasses, a cask of rum, some cases of dried fruit, these were mouldy and scarce fit to be eaten, a cask of salt beef and another of pork, a small barrel of vinegar, a case of brandy, 2 barrels of flour, one of which proved to be damp-struck, and a bunch of tallow dips. In a little while we had all these things up in the big cabin, so that we might come at them the better to make choice of that which was fit for our stomachs, and that which was otherwise. Meantime, whilst the boatswain overhauled these masses, Josh called a couple of the men and went on deck to bring up the gear from the boats, for it had been decided that we should pass the night aboard the hulk. When this was accomplished, Josh took a walk forward to the forecastle, but found nothing beyond 2 seamen's chests, a sea bag and some odd gear. There were indeed no more than 10 bunks in the place, for she was but a small brig and had no call for a great crowd. Yet Josh was more than a little puzzled to know what had come to the odd chests, for it was not to be supposed that there had been no more than 2, and a sea bag among 10 men. But to this, at that time he had no answer, and so, being sharp for supper, made a return to the deck and thence to the main cabin. Now, while he had been gone, the boatswain had set the men to clearing out the main cabin, after which he had served out 2 biscuits apiece all round and a tot of rum. To Josh, when he appeared, he gave the same, and in a little we called a sort of council, being sufficiently steered by the food to talk. Yet, before we came to speech, we made shift to light our pipes, for the boatswain had discovered a case of tobacco in the captain's cabin, and after this we came to the consideration of our position. We had provender, so the boatswain calculated, to last us for the better part of 2 months, and this without any great stint. But we had yet to prove if the brig held water in her casks, for that in the creek was brackish, even so far as we had penetrated from the sea, else we had not been in need. To the charge of this, the boatswain set Josh, along with 2 of the men. Another he told to take the charge of the galley, so long as we were in the hulk. But for that night, he said we had no need to do aught, for we had sufficient of water in the boat's breakers to last us till the morrow. And so, in a little, the dusk began to fill the cabin, but we talked on, being greatly content with our present ease, and the good tobacco which we enjoyed. In a little while, one of the men cried out suddenly to us to be silent, and, in that minute, all heard it. A far, drawn-out wailing, the same which had come to us in the evening of the first day. At that we looked at one another through the smoke and the growing dark, and even as we looked it became plainer heard, until, in a while, it was all about us. Aye, it seemed to come floating down through the broken framework of the skylight as though some weariful, unseen thing stood and cried upon the decks above our heads. Now, through all that crying, none moved. None, that is, save Josh and the boatswain, and they went up to the scuttle to see whether anything was in sight. But they found nothing, and so came down to us, for there was no wisdom in exposing ourselves, unarmed as we were, save for our sheath knives. And so, in a little, the night crept down upon the world, and still we sat within the dark cabin, none speaking, and knowing of the rest only by the glows of their pipes. All at once there came a low, muttered growl, stealing across the land, and immediately the crying was quenched in its sullen thunder. It died away, and there was a full minute of silence. Then, once more it came, and it was nearer and more plain to the ear. I took my pipe from her mouth, for I had come again upon the great fear and uneasiness which the happenings of the first night had bred in me, and the taste of the smoke brought me no more pleasure. The muttered growl swept over our heads and died away into the distance, and there was a sudden silence. Then, in that quietness, came the boatswain's voice. He was bidding us haste every one into the captain's cabin. As we moved to obey him, he ran to draw over the lid of the scuttle, and Josh went with him, and together they had it across, though with difficulty. When he had come into the captain's cabin, we closed and barred the door, piling the two great sea chests up against it, and so we felt safe, for we knew that no thing, man nor beast, could come at us there. Yet, as may be supposed, we felt not altogether secure, for there was that in the growling which now filled the darkness that seemed demonic, and we knew not what horrid powers were abroad. And so through the night the growling continued, seeming to be mighty near unto us, aye, almost over our heads, and of a loudness far surpassing all that had come to us on the previous night, so that I thanked the Almighty that he had come into shelter in the midst of so much fear. Chapter 3. The Thing That Made Search. Now, at times, I fell upon sleep, as did most of the others, but for the most part I lay half asleep and half waking, being unable to attain to true sleep by reason of the everlasting growling above us in the night, and the fear which it bred in me. Thus, it chanced that just after midnight I caught a sound in the main cabin beyond the door, and immediately I was fully waked. I sat me up and listened, and so became aware that something was fumbling about the deck of the main cabin. At that I got to my feet and made way to where the boatswain lay, meaning to waken him if he slept. But he caught me by the ankle as I stooped to shake him, and whispered to me to keep silence, for he, too, had been aware of that strange noise of something fumbling beyond the big cabin. In a little, we crept both of us so close to the door as the chest would allow, and there we crouched, listening, but could not tell what manner of thing it might be which produced so strange a noise, for it was neither shuffling nor treading of any kind, nor yet was it the whir of a bat's wings, the which had first occurred to me, knowing how vampires are said to inhabit the nights in dismal places. Nor yet was it the slur of a snake, but rather it seemed to us to be as though a great wet cloth were being rubbed everywhere across the floor and the bulkheads. We were the better able to be certain of the truth of this likeness when, suddenly, it passed across the further side of the door behind which we listened, at which, you may be sure, we drew backwards both of us in fright, though the door and the chest stood between us and that which rubbed against it. Presently the sound ceased, and, listen as we might, we could no longer distinguish it. Yet, Until the morning we dozed no more, being troubled in mind as to what manner of thing it was which had made search in the big cabin. Then, in time, the day came, and the growling ceased. For a mournful while the sad crying filled our ears, and then, at last, the eternal silence that fills the day hours in that dismal land, the day hours of that dismal land fell upon us. So, being at last in quietness, we slept, being greatly awearied. About 7 in the morning, the boatswain waked me, and I found that they had opened the door into the big cabin. But though the boatswain and I made careful search, we could nowhere come upon anything to tell us aught concerning the thing which had put us so in fright. Yet I know not if I am right in saying that we had come upon nothing, for in several places the bulkheads had a chafed look, but whether this had been there before that night we had no means of telling. Of that which we had heard the boatswain bade me make no mention, for he would not have the men put more in fear than need be. This I conceived to be wisdom, and so held my peace. Yet I was much more troubled in my mind to know what manner of thing it was which we had needed to fear, and more, I desired greatly to know whether we should be free of it in the daylight hours. For there was always with me, as I went hither and thither, the thought that it, for that is how I designated it in my mind, might come upon us to our destruction. Now, after breakfast, at which we had each a portion of salt pork, besides rum and biscuit, for now by the fire in the caboose had been set going, we turned to at various matters under the directing of the boatswain. Josh and two of the men made examination of the water casks, and the rest of us lifted the main hatch covers to make inspection of our cargo. But lo, we found nothing, save some 3 feet of water in our hold. By this time, Josh had drawn some water off from the casks, but it was most unsuitable for drinking, being vile of smell and taste. Yet the boatswain bade him draw some into buckets, so that the air might haply purify it. But though this was done, and the water allowed to stand through the morning, it was but little better. At this, as might be imagined, we were exercising our minds as to the manner in which we should come upon suitable water, for by now we were beginning to be in need of it. Yet, though one said one thing and another said another, no one had wit enough to call to mind any method by which our need should be satisfied. Then, when we had made an end of dining, the boatswain sent Josh, with 4 of the men, upstream. Perchance after a mile or 2 the water should prove of sufficient freshness to meet our purpose. They yet returned a little before sundown, having no water, for everywhere it was salt. Now the boatswain, foreseeing that it might be impossible to come upon water, had set the man whom he had ordained to be our cook to boiling the creek water in 3 great kettles. This he had ordered to be done soon after the boat left, and over the spout of each he had hung a great pot of iron filled with cold water from the hold, this being cooler than that from the creek, so that the steam from each kettle impinged upon the cold surface of the iron pots, and being by this means condensed, was caught in the 3 buckets placed beneath him upon the floor of the caboose. In this way enough water was collected to supply us for the evening and the following morning. Yet it was but a slow method, and we had sore need of a speedier, were we to leave the hulk so soon as I, for one, desired. We made our supper before sunset, so as to be free of the crying which we had reason to expect. After that, the boatswain shut the scuttle, and we went every one of us into the captain's cabin, after which we barred the door, as on the previous night, and well was it for us that we acted with this prudence. By the time that we had come into the captain's cabin and secured the door, it was upon sunsetting, and as the dusk came on, so did the melancholy wailing pass over the land. Yet, being by now somewhat inured to so much strangeness, we lit our pipes and smoked, though I observed that none talked, for the crying without was not to be forgotten. Now, as I have said, we kept silence, but this was only for a time, and our reason for breaking it was a discovery made by George, the younger apprentice. This lad, being no smoker, was fain to do something to while away the time, and with this intent he had raked out the contents of a small box which had lain upon the deck at the side of the forward bulkhead. The box had appeared filled with odd small lumber, of which a part was a dozen or so grey paper wrappers, such as are used, I believe, for carrying samples of corn, though I have seen them put to other purposes, as indeed was now the case. At first George had tossed these aside, but it was growing darker. The bosun lit. At first George had tossed these aside, but it growing darker, the bosun lit one of the candles which we had found in the lazarette. Thus, George, who was proceeding to tidy back the rubbish which was cumbering the place, discovered something which caused him to cry out to us his astonishment. Now, upon hearing George call out, the bosun bade him keep silence, thinking it was but a piece of boyish restlessness. But George drew the candle to him and bade us to listen, for the wrappers were covered in fine handwriting after the fashion of a woman's. Even as George told us of that which he had found, we became aware that the night was upon us. For suddenly the crying ceased, and in place thereof came out of the far distance the low thunder of the night growling that had tormented us the past 2 nights. For a space we ceased to smoke, and sat listening, for it was a very fearsome sound. In a very little while it seemed to surround the ship as on the previous nights, but at length, using ourselves to it, we resumed our smoking, and bade George to read out to us from the writing upon the paper wrappers. Then George, though shaking somewhat in his voice, began to decipher that which was upon the wrappers, and a strange and awesome story it was, and bearing much upon our own concerns. Now, when they discovered the spring among the trees that crowned the bank, there was much rejoicing, for we had come to have much need of water, and some, being in fear of the ship, declaring because of all our misfortune and the strange disappearance of their messmates and the brother of my lover, that she was haunted by a devil, declared their intention of taking their gear up to the spring, and there making a camp. This they conceived and carried out in the space of 1 afternoon, though our captain, a good and true man, begged of them, as they valued life, to stay within the shelter of their living place. Yet, as I have remarked, they would none of them hark to his counselling, and because the mate and the boatswain were gone, he had no means of compelling them to wisdom. At this point, George ceased to read and began to rustle among the wrappers, as though in search for the continuation of the story. Presently he cried out that he could not find it, and dismay was upon his face. But the boatswain told him to read on from such sheets as were left, for, as he observed, we had no knowledge if more existed, and we were fain to know further of that spring which, from the story, appeared to be over in the bank near to the vessel. George, being thus adjured, picked up the topmost sheet, for they were, as I heard him explain to the boatswain, all oddly numbered, and having but little reference one to the other. Yet we were mightily keen to know even so much as such odd scraps might tell unto us. Whereupon George read from the next wrapper, which ran thus. Now, suddenly I heard the captain cry out that there was something in the main cabin, and immediately my lover's voice calling to me to lock my door, and on no condition to open it. Then the door of the captain's cabin slammed, and there came a silence, and the silence was broken by a sound. Now, this was the first time that I had heard the thing make search through the big cabin, but afterwards my lover told me that it had happened aforetime, and they had told me naught, fearing to frighten me needlessly. Though now I understood why my lover had bidden me never to leave my stateroom door unbolted in the night time. I remember also wondering if the noise of breaking glass that had waked me somewhat from my dreams a night or 2 previously had been the work of this indescribable thing. for on the morning following that night the glass in the skylight had been smashed. Thus it was that my thoughts wandered out to trifles, while yet my soul seemed ready to leap out from my bosom with fright. I had, by reason of usage, come to ability to sleep despite all the fearsome growling, for I had conceived its cause to be the mutter of spirits in the night, and had not allowed myself to be unnecessarily frightened with doleful thoughts. For my lover had assured me of our safety, and that we should yet come to our home. And now, beyond my door, I could hear that fearsome sound of the thing searching. George came to a sudden pause, for the bo'sun had risen and put a great hand upon his shoulder. The lad made to speak, but the bo'sun beckoned to him to say no word, and at that we, who had grown to nervousness through the happenings in the story, began every one to listen. Thus we heard a sound which had escaped us in the noise of the growling without the vessel, and the interest of the reading. It's Joey jumping down off the ground. For a space we kept very silent, no man doing more than let the breath go in and out of his body, and so each one of us knew that something moved without, in the big cabin. And a little, something touched upon the door, and it was, as I have mentioned earlier, as though a great swab rubbed and scrubbed at the woodwork. At this, the men nearest under the door came backwards in a surge, being put in sudden fear by reason of the thing being so near. But the bo'sun held up a hand, bidding them, in a low voice, to make no unneedful noise. Yet, as the sounds of their moving had been heard, the door was shaken with such violence that we waited, everyone expecting to see it torn from its hinges. But it stood, and we hasted to brace it by means of the bunk boards which we placed between it and the two great chests, and upon these we set a third chest, so that the door was quite hid. Now, I have no remembrance whether I have put down that when we came first to the ship, we had found the stern window upon the larboard side to be shattered. But so it was, and the bo'sun had closed it by means of a teak wood cover, which was made to go over it in stormy weather, with stout battens across, which were set tight with wedges. This he had done upon the first night, having fear that some evil things might come upon us through the opening, and very prudent was this same action of his, as shall be seen. Then George cried out that something was at the cover of the larboard window, and we stood back, growing ever more fearful because that some evil creature was so eager to come at us. But the bo'sun, who was a very courageous man, and calm withal, walked over to the closed window, and saw to it that the battens were secure, for he had knowledge sufficient to be sure, if this were so, that no creature with strength less than that of a whale could break it down, and in such case its bulk would assure us from being molested. Then, even as he made sure of its fastenings, there came a cry of fear from some of the men, for there had come at the glass of the unbroken window a reddish mass, which plunged up against it, sucking upon it as it were. Then Josh, who was nearest to the table, caught up the candle and held it towards the thing. Thus I saw that it had the appearance of a many-flapped thing, shaped as it might be out of raw beef, but it was alive. At this we stared, everyone being too bemused with terror to do aught to protect ourselves, even had we been possessed of weapons. And as we remained thus, an instant, like silly sheep awaiting the butcher, I heard the framework creak and crack, and there ran splits all across the glass. In another moment the whole thing would have been torn away and the cabin undefended, but the bo'sun, with a great curse at us for our landlubberly lack of use, seized the other cover and clapped it over the window. At that, there was more help than could be made to avail, and the battens and wedges were in place in a trice. That this was no sooner accomplished than need be, we had immediate proof, for there came a rending of wood and a splintering of glass, and after that a strange yowling out in the dark, and the yowling rose above and drowned the continuous growling that filled the night. In a little it died away, and in the brief silence that seemed to ensue, we heard a slobby fumbling at the teak cover. But it was well secured, and we had no immediate cause for fear. And that is where we're going to go to a break. So, you know what to do. Move around, stretch, cycle those fluids, stroke your cat, and I'll see you back here in about 5 minutes or so, friends. Thank you. Back, accent detectives. Hello. Yes, I guess sort of broadly, I suppose it's the accent that I've apparently decided I'm doing for this is, yeah, a sort of broadly northern Geordie-ish kind of, like, it's not kind of so far into my attempt at a Geordie accent that it sounds like mockery, I think. I guess I'd sort of call it, I suppose my guess out idea for it would be that it's like someone who has moved either from where I am to like a Northumbria kind of region, or come the other way, and so the accent is like a bit of a combination of the two. So if anything sounds correct, then good, and if it sounds wrong, then that's just the accent. But yeah, I'm not doing like the full-on. See, if I try to do it, it's not going to work. But read pet that kind of thing. It's not like, yeah, we're bike a grove. I'm not doing that, because doing that for an entire book is going to be very difficult and tiresome for me. But I don't know. I felt like it needed a little bit more character to the voice than just my standard, ordinary reading voice. So yeah, that's what I've gone with for that. Whether it succeeds or fails, who knows? It's live reading, and I am not in any way some kind of trained voice actor or accentist. Intellectually, that Dick Van Dyke is in Mary Poppins has a terrible accent, but you have to listen. For it. Fair, yeah. Lama, does the image blur for anyone else? I mean, not for me. That would be interesting. It might just be on your end. I'm not dropping any frames or anything like that. Yeah. Pearl, at first you thought you just hadn't noticed my accent before? Aye. I feel like my accent is... it is extremely devoid of character. Ordinarily. And this isn't me like putting myself down, but like this my standard ordinary speaking voice accent is extremely just bland and mid, and that's fine. But yeah, I don't know, I've never like studied different accents and things. It's just what you pick up from hearing people talk. But anyway, we have a couple more chapters to get through. Is it literally 2 more chapters that I've got picked out? It is. Oh, Twitch resolution automatic that's struggling. Ah, great. Twitch doing the fun buffering thing, which if you're listening to music you would hear like warping and bending and doing like as it's trying to do weird compression things while it figures it out. Great. Does he normally say those vowels like that? No, pet. I sound very fancy to you. Well, thank you. Anyway, before we get down to this, I'm going to carry on reading. So, yeah, we shall continue. I'm going to drink some water. You're all saying nice things. I'm not going to read them. Stop it. Anyway, let us continue. Chapter 4. The Two Faces. Now to remember the accent I was doing. Of the remainder of that night, I have but a confused memory. At times we heard the door shaking behind the great chests, but no harm came to it. And, odd whiles, there was a soft thudding and rubbing across the decks over our heads, and once, as I recollect, the thing made a final try at the teak covers beyond the windows, but the day came at last and found me sleeping. Indeed, we had slept beyond the noon, but that the bo'sun, mindful of our needs, waked us, and we removed the chests. Yet, for perhaps the space of a minute, none durst open the door until the bo'sun bid us stand to one side. We faced about at him then, and saw that he held a great cutlass in his right hand. He called to us that there were 4 more of the weapons, and made a backward motion with his left hand towards the unopened locker. At that, as might be supposed, we made some haste to the place which he pointed, and found that, among some other gear, there were 3 more weapons such as he held. But the 4th was a straight cut and thrust, and this I had the good fortune to secure. Being now armed, we ran to join the bo'sun, for by this he had the door open, and was scanning the main cabin. I would remark here how a good weapon doth seem to put heart into a man, for I, who but a few short hours since had feared for my life, was now right full of lustiness and fight, which, mayhap, was no matter for regret. From the main cabin, the bo'sun led up onto the deck, and I remember some surprise at finding the lid of the scuttle even as we had left it the previous night. But then I recollected that the skylight was broken and there was access to the big cabin that way. Yet I questioned within myself as to what manner of thing it could be which ignored the convenience of the scuttle and descended by way of the broken skylight. We made a search of the decks and the forecastle, but found nothing, and after that the bo'sun stationed 2 of us on guard, whilst the rest went about such duties as were needful. In a little we came to breakfast, and after that we prepared to test the story upon the sample wrappers and see perchance whether there was indeed a spring of fresh water among the trees. Now, between the vessel and the trees lay a slope of thick mud against which the vessel rested. To have scrambled up this bank had been next to impossible by reason of its fat richness, for indeed it looked fit to crawl, but that Josh called out to the bo'sun that he had come upon a ladder lashed across to the forecastle head. This was brought, also several hatch covers. The latter were placed first upon the mud, and the ladder laid upon them, by which means we were enabled to pass up to the top of the bank without contact with the mud. Here we entered at once among the trees, for they grew right up to the edge, but we had no trouble in making a way, for they were nowhere close together, but standing rather each one in a little open space by itself. We had gone a little way among the trees, when suddenly one who was with us cried out that he could see something away on our right, and we clutched everyone his weapon the more determinedly and went towards it. Yet it proved to be but a seaman's chest, and space further off we discovered another. And so, after a little walking, we found the camp. But there was small semblance of a camp about it, for the sail of which the tent had been formed was all torn and stained, and lay muddy upon the ground. Yet the spring was all we had wished, clear and sweet, and so we knew we might dream of deliverance. Now, upon our discovery of the spring, it might be thought that we should set up a shout to those upon the vessel, but this was not so, for there was something in the air of the place which cast a gloom upon our spirits, and we had no disinclination to return unto the vessel. Upon coming to the brig, the bo'sun called to 4 of the men to go down into the boats and pass up the breakers. Also he collected all the buckets belonging to the brig, and forthwith each of us was set to our work. Some, those with weapons, entered into the wood, and gave down the water to those stationed upon the bank, and these, in turn, passed it to those in the vessel. To the man in the galley the bo'sun gave commands to fill a boiler with some of the most select pieces of the pork and beef from the casks, and get them cooked so soon as might be, and so we were kept at it, for it had been determined, now that we had come upon water, that we should stay not an hour longer in the monster-ridden craft, and were all agog to get the boats revictualled and put back to the sea from which we had too gladly escaped. So we worked through all that remainder of the morning and right on into the afternoon, for we were in mortal fear of the coming dark. Towards 4 o'clock, the boatswain sent the man who had been set to do our cooking up to us with slices of salt meat upon biscuits, and we ate as we worked, washing our throats with water from the spring. And so before the evening we had filled our breakers, and near every vessel which was convenient for us to take in the boats. More, some of us snatched the chance to wash our bodies, for we were sore with brine, having dipped in the sea to keep down thirst as much as might be. Now, though it had not taken us so great a while to make a finish of our water carrying if matters had been more convenient, yet because of the softness of the ground under our feet, and the care with which we had to pick our steps, some little distance between us and the brig, it had grown later than we desired, before we had made an end. Therefore, when the boatswain sent word that we should come aboard and bring our gear, we made all haste. Thus, as it chanced, I found that I had left my sword beside the spring, having placed it there to have 2 hands for the carrying of one of the breakers. At my remarking my loss, George, who stood near, cried out that he would run for it, and was gone in a moment, being greatly curious to see the spring. Now, at this moment the boatswain came up and called for George, but I informed him that he had run to the spring to bring me my sword. At this the boatswain stamped his foot and swore an oath, declaring that he had kept the lad by him all the day, having a wish to keep him from any danger which the wood might hold, and knowing the lad's desire for an adventure there. At this, a matter which I should have known, I reproached myself for so gross a piece of stupidity, and hastened after the boatswain, who had disappeared over the top of the bank. I saw his back as he passed into the wood, and ran until I was up there with him. For suddenly, as it were, I found that a sense of chilly dampness had come upon the trees, though a while before the place had been full of warmth of the sun. This I put to the account of evening, which was drawing on apace, and also it must be borne in the mind that there were but the 2 of us. We came to the spring, but George was not to be seen, and I saw no sign of my sword. At this, the boatswain raised his voice and cried out the lad's name. Once he called, and again. Then, at the second shout, we heard the boy's shrill halloo from some distance ahead among the trees. At that, we ran towards the sound, plunging heavily across the ground, which was everywhere covered with a thick scum that clogged the feet in walking. As we ran, we hallooed, and so came upon the boy, and I saw that he had my sword. The boatswain ran towards him and caught him by the arm, speaking with anger, and commanding him to return with us immediately to the vessel. But the lad, for reply, pointed with my sword, and we saw that he pointed at what appeared to be a bird against the trunk of one of the trees. This, as I moved closer, I perceived to be part of the tree and no bird, but it had a very wondrous likeness to a bird, so much that I went up to see it, to see if my eyes had deceived me. Yet it seemed no more than a freak of nature, though most wondrous in its fidelity, being but an excrescence upon the trunk. With a sudden thought that it would make me a curio, I reached up to see whether I could break it away from the tree, but it was above my reach, so that I had to leave it. Yet, one thing I discovered, for in stretching towards the protuberance, I had placed a hand upon the tree, and its trunk was soft as pulp under my fingers, much after the fashion of a mushroom. As we turned to go, the boatswain inquired of George his reason for going beyond the spring, and George told him that he had seemed to hear someone calling to him among the trees, and there had been so much pain in the voice that he had run towards him, but been unable to discover the owner. Immediately afterwards he had seen the curious bird-like excrescence upon a tree nearby. Then we had called out, and of the rest we had knowledge. We had come nigh to the spring on our return journey, when a sudden low whine seemed to run among the trees. I glanced towards the sky, and realized that the evening was upon us. I was about to remark upon this to the boatswain when, abruptly, he came to a stand and bent forward to stare into the shadows to our right. At that, George and I turned ourselves about to perceive what matter it was which had attracted the attention of the boatswain. Thus we made out a tree some 20 yards away, which had all its branches wrapped about its trunk, much as the lash of a whip is round about its stock. Now this seemed to us a very strange sight, and we made all of us toward it, to learn the reason of so extraordinary a happening. Yet, when we had come close upon it, we had no means of arriving at a knowledge of that which it portended, but walked each of us around the tree, and were more astonished after our circumnavigation of the great vegetable than before. Now, suddenly, and in the distance, I caught the far wailing that came before the night, and abruptly, as it seemed to me, the tree wailed at us. At that I was vastly astonished and frightened. Yet, though I retreated, I could not withdraw my gaze from the tree, but scanned it the more intently, and suddenly I saw a brown human face peering at us from between the wrapped branches. At this I stood very still, being seized with that fear which renders one shortly incapable of movement. Then, before I had possession of myself, I saw that it was of a part with the trunk of the tree, for I could not tell where it ended and the tree began. Then I caught the boatswain by the arm and pointed, for whether it was a part of the tree or not, it was a work of the devil. But the boatswain, on seeing it, ran straight away so close to the tree that he might have touched it with his hand, and I found myself beside him. Now, George, who was on the boatswain's other side, whispered that there was another face not unlike to a woman's, and indeed, so soon as I perceived it, I saw that the tree had a second excrescence, most strangely after the face of a woman. Then the boatswain cried out with an oath at the strangeness of the thing, and I felt the arm which I held shake somewhat, as it might be with a deep emotion. Then, far away, I heard again the sound of the wailing, and immediately from among the trees about us there came answering wails and a great sighing, and before I had time to be more than aware of these things, the tree wailed again at us. And at that the boatswain cried out suddenly that he knew, though of what it was that he knew I had at that time no knowledge. And immediately he began with his cutlass to strike at the tree before us, and to cry upon God to blast it. And lo, at his smiting, a very fearsome thing happened, for the tree did bleed like any live creature. Thereafter a great yowling came from it, and it began to writhe, and suddenly I became aware that all about us the trees were a-quiver. Then George cried out, and ran round upon my side of the boatswain, and I saw that one of the great cabbage-like things pursued him upon its stem, even as an evil serpent. And very dreadful it was, for it had become blood-red in colour, but I smote it with the sword which I had taken from the lad, and it fell to the ground. Now from the brig I heard them hallooing, and the trees had become like live things, and there was a vast growling in the air, and hideous trumpetings. Then I caught the boatswain again by the arm, and shouted to him that we must run for our lives, and this we did, smiting with our swords as we ran, for there came things at us out from the growing dusk. Thus we made the brig, and, the boats being ready, I scrambled after the boatswain into his, and we put straight away into the creek, all of us, pulling with so much haste as our loads would allow. As we went, I looked back at the brig, and it seemed to me that a multitude of things hung over the bank above her, and there seemed a flicker of things moving hither and thither aboard her. And then we were in the great creek, up which we had come, and so, in a little, it was night. All that night we rowed, keeping very strictly to the centre of the big creek, and all about us bellowed the vast growling, being more fearsome than ever I had heard it, until it seemed to me that we had waked all that land of terror to a knowledge of our presence. But when the morning came, so good a speed had we made, what with our fear, and the current being with us, that we were nigh upon the open sea, whereat each one of us raised a shout, feeling like freed prisoners. And so, Full of thankfulness to the Almighty, we rowed outward to the sea. Chapter 5. The Great Storm. Now, as I have said, we came at last in safety to the open sea, and so for a time had some degree of peace, though it was long ere we threw off all the terror which the land of lonesomeness had cast over our hearts. And one more matter there is regarding that land which my memory recalls. It will be remembered that George found certain wrappers upon which there was writing. Now, in the haste of our leaving, he had given no thought to take them with him, yet a portion of one he found within the side pocket of his jacket, and it ran somewhat thus: "But I hear my lover's voice wailing in the night, and I go to find him, for my loneliness is not to be borne. May God have mercy upon me." And that was all. For a day and a night we stood out from the land towards the north, having a steady breeze to which we set our lug sails, and so made very good way, the sea being quiet, though with a slow lumbering swell from the southward. It was on the morning of the second day of our escape that we met with the beginnings of our adventure into the silent sea, the which I am about to make as clear as I am able. The night had been quiet, and the breeze steady until near on to the dawn, when the wind slacked away to nothing, and we lay there waiting. Perchance the sun should bring the breeze with it. And this it did, but no such wind as we did desire. For when the morning came upon us, we discovered all that part of the sky to be full of a fiery redness, which presently spread away down to the south, so that an entire quarter of the heavens was, as it seemed to us, a mighty arc of blood-coloured fire. Now, at the sight of these omens, the boatswain gave orders to prepare the boats for the storm which we had reason to expect, looking for it in the south, for it was from that direction that the swell came rolling upon us. With this intent we roused out of so much heavy canvas as the boats contained, for we had gotten a bolt and a half from the hulk in the creek. Also the boat covers, which we could lash down to the brass studs under the gunwales of the boats. Then, in each boat we mounted the whaleback, which had been stowed along the tops of the thwarts, also its supports, lashing the same to the thwarts below the knees. Then we had laid 2 lengths of the stout canvas the full length of the boat over the whaleback, overlapping and nailing them to the same, so that they sloped away down over the gunwales upon each side as though they had formed a roof to us. Here, whilst some stretching the canvas, nailing its lower edges to the gunwale, others were employed in lashing together the oars and the mast, and to this bundle they secured a considerable length of new 3.5-inch hemp rope, which we had brought away from the hulk along with the canvas. This rope was then passed over the bows and in through the painter ring, and thence to the forward thwarts, where it was made fast, and we gave attention to parcel it with odd strips of canvas against danger of chafe. And the same was done in both of the boats, for we could not put our trust in the painters, besides which they had not sufficient length to secure safe and easy riding. Now by this time we had the canvas nailed down to the gunwale around our boat, after which we spread the boat cover over it, lacing it down to the brass studs beneath the gunwale. And so we had all the boat covered in, save a place in the stern where a man might stand to wield the steering oar, for the boats were double-bowed. And in each boat we made the same preparation, lashing all movable articles, and preparing to meet so great a storm as might well fill the heart with terror. For the sky cried out to us that it would be no light wind, and further, the great swell from the south grew more huge with every hour that passed, though as yet it was without virulence, being slow and oily and black against the redness of the sky. Presently we were ready, and had cast over the bundle of oars and the mast, which was... Presently we were ready, and had cast over the bundle of oars and the mast, which was to serve as our sea anchor, and so we lay waiting. It was at this time that the boatswain called over to Josh certain advice with regard to that which lay before us, and after that the two of them sculled the boats a little apart, for there might be a danger of their being dashed together by the first violence of the storm. And so came a time of waiting, with Josh and the boatswain each of them at the steering oars, and the rest of us stowed away under the coverings. From where I crouched near the boatswain, I had sight of Josh away upon our port side. He was standing up black as a shape of night against the mighty redness, when the boat came to the foamless crowns of the swells, and then gone from sight in the hollows between. Now midday had come and gone, and we had made shift to eat so good a meal as our appetites would allow, for we had no knowledge how long it might be ere we should have chance of another, if, indeed, we had ever need to think more of such. And then, in the middle part of the afternoon, we heard the first cryings of the storm, a far distant moaning, rising and falling most solemnly. Presently, all the southern part of the horizon, so high up, maybe as some 7 to 10 degrees, was blotted out by a great black wall of cloud, over which the red glare came down upon the great swells as though from the light of some vast and unseen fire. It was about this time I observed that the sun had the appearance of a great full moon, being pale and clearly defined, and seeming to have no warmth nor brilliancy. And this, as may be imagined, seemed most strange to us, the more so because of the redness in the south and east. And all this while the swells increased most prodigiously, though without making broken water. Yet they informed us that we had done well to take so much precaution, for surely they were raised by a very great storm. A little before evening the moaning came again, and then a space of silence, after which there rose a very sudden bellowing as of wild beasts, and then once more the silence. About this time the boatswain, making no objection, I raised my head above the cover until I was in a standing position, for until now I had taken no more than occasional peeps, and I was very glad of the chance to stretch my limbs, for I had grown mightily cramped. Having stirred the sluggishness in my blood, I sat me down again, but in such position that I could see every part of the horizon without difficulty. Ahead of us, that is, to the south, I saw now that the great wall of cloud had risen some further degrees, and there was something less of the redness, though indeed what there was left of it was sufficiently terrifying, for it appeared to crest the black cloud like red foam, seeming, it might be, as though a mighty sea made ready to break over the world. Towards the west the sun was sinking behind a curious red-tinted haze, which gave it the appearance of a dull red disk. To the north, seeming very high in the sky, were some flecks of cloud lying motionless, and of a very pretty rose colour. And here I may remark that all the sea to the north of us appeared... Okay, I'm back. And here I may remark that all the sea to the north of us appeared as a very ocean of dull red fire, though, as might be expected, the swells coming up from the south against the light were so many exceeding great hills of blackness. It was just after I had made these observations that we heard again the distant roaring of the storm, and I know not how to convey the exceeding terror of that sound. It was as though some mighty beast growled far down towards the south, and it seemed to make very clear to me that we were but two small craft in a very lonesome place. Then, even while the roaring lasted, I saw a sudden light flare up, as it were from the edge of the southern horizon. It had somewhat the appearance of lightning, yet vanished not immediately, as is the wont with lightning. And more, it had not been my experience to witness such spring up from out of the sea, but rather down from the heavens. Yet I have little doubt but that it was a form of lightning, for it came many times after this, so that I had chance to observe it minutely, and frequently, as I watched, the storm would shout at us in a most fearsome manner. Then, when the sun was low upon the horizon, there came to our ears a very shrill, screaming noise, most penetrating and distressing, and immediately afterwards the boatswain shouted out something in a hoarse voice, and commenced to sway furiously upon the steering oar. I saw his stare fixed upon a point a little on our larboard bow, and perceived that in that direction the sea was all blown up in the vast clouds of dust-like froth, and I knew that the storm was upon us. Immediately afterwards a cold blast struck us, but we suffered no harm, for the boatswain had gotten the boat bows on by this. The wind passed us, and there was an instant of calm, and now all the air above us was full of a continuous roaring, so very loud and intense that I was like to be deafened. To windward I perceived an enormous wall of spray bearing down upon us, and I heard again the shrill screaming pierce through the roaring. Then the boatswain whipped in his oar under the cover, and, reaching forward, drew the canvas aft so that it covered the entire boat, and he held it down against the gunwale upon the starboard side, shouting in my ear to do likewise upon the larboard. Now, had it not been for this forethought on the part of the boatswain, we had been all dead men. And this may be the better believed when I explain that we felt the water falling upon the stout canvas overhead, tons and tons, though so beaten to froth as to lack solidity to sink or crush us. I have said felt, for I would make it so clear as may be, here once and for all, that so intense was the roaring and screaming of the elements, there could no sound have penetrated to us. No, not the pealing of mighty thunders. And so for the space of maybe a full minute the boat quivered and shook most violently, so that she seemed like to have been shaken in pieces, and from a dozen places between the gunwale and the covering canvas the water spurted in upon us. And here one other thing I would make mention of. During that minute the boat ceased to rise and fall upon the great swell, and whether this was because the sea was flattened by the first rush of the wind, or that the excess of the storm held us steady, I am unable to tell, and can put down only that which we felt. Now, in a little, the first fury of the blast being spent, the boat began to sway from side to side, as though the wind blew now upon the one beam, and now upon the other, and several times we were stricken heavily with blows of solid water. But presently this ceased, and we returned once again to the rise and fall of the swell, only that now we received a cruel jerk every time that the boat came upon the top of a sea, and so a while passed. Towards midnight, as I should judge, there came some mighty flames of lightning, so bright that they lit up the boat through the double covering of canvas. Yet no man of us heard aught of the thunder, for the roaring of the storm made all else a silence. And so to the dawn, after which, finding that we were still, by the mercy of God, possessed of our lives, we made shift to eat and drink, after which we slept. Now, being extremely wearied by the stress of the past night, I slumbered through many hours of the storm, waking at some time between noon and evening. Overhead, as I lay looking upwards, the canvas showed of a dull leadenish colour, blackened completely at whiles by the dash of spray and water. And so, presently, having eaten again, and feeling that all things lay in the hands of the Almighty, I came once more upon sleep. Twice through the following night was I wakened by the boat being hurled upon her beam ends by the blows of the seas, but she righted easily, and took scarce any water, the canvas proving a very roof of safety, and so the morning came again. Being now rested, I crawled after to where the boatswain lay, and, the noise of the storm lulling odd instants, shouted in his ear to know whether the wind was easing at whiles. To this he nodded, whereat I felt a most joyful sense of hope pulse through me, and ate such food as could be gotten with a very good relish. In the afternoon, the sun broke out suddenly, lighting up the boat most gloomily through the wet canvas. Yet a very welcome light it was, and bred in us a hope that the storm was near to breaking. In a little, the sun disappeared, but presently it coming again, the boatswain beckoned to me to assist him, and we removed such temporary nails as we had used to fasten down the after part of the canvas, and pushed back the covering a space sufficient to allow our heads to go through into the daylight. On looking out, I discovered the air to be full of spray, beaten as fine as dust, and then, before I could note aught else, a little gout of water took me in the face with a sudden force as to deprive me of breath, so that I had to descend beneath the canvas for a little while. So soon as I was recovered, I thrust forth my head again, and now I had some sight of the terrors around us. As each huge sea came towards us, the boat shot up to meet it, right up to the very crest, and there, for the space of some instants, we would seem to be swamped in a very ocean of foam, boiling up on each side of the boat to the height of many feet. Then, the sea passing from under us, we would go swooping dizzily back down the great black froth-splotched back of the wave, until the oncoming sea caught up most mightily. Odd whiles, the crest of a sea would hurl forward before we had reached the top, and though the boat shot upward like a veritable feather, yet the water would swirl right over us, and we would have to draw in our heads most suddenly. In such cases, the wind flapping the cover down so soon as our heads were removed. And apart from the way in which the boat met the seas, there was a very sense of terror in the air. The continuous roaring and howling of the storm, the screaming of the foam, and the frothy summits of the briny mountains hurled past us, and the wind that tore the breath out of our weak human throats, are things scarce to be conceived. Presently we drew in our heads, the sun having vanished again, and nailed down the canvas once more, and so prepared for the night. From here on until the morning I have very little knowledge of any happenings, for I slept much of the time, and for the rest there was little to know, cooped up beneath the cover. Nothing save the interminable, thundering swoop of the boat downwards, and then the halts and upward hurl, and the occasional plunges and surges to larboard or starboard, occasioned, I can only suppose, by the indiscriminate might of the sea. I would make mention here how that I had little thought all this while for the peril of the other boat, and indeed I was so very full of our own that it is no matter at which to wonder. However, as it proved, and as this is a most suitable place in which to tell it, the boat that held Josh and the rest of the crew came through the storm with safety, though it was not until many years afterwards that I had the good fortune to hear from Josh himself how that, after the storm, they were picked up by a homeward-bound vessel and landed in the port of London. And now, to our own happenings. Which we will have to come back to next time, because that cliffhanger is where we shall leave off tonight. Thank you for listening. Relish, indeed, yeah. Eaten boiled pork or whatever it is they're having with relish. Lovely. Boat hanger, yes. Lama, you did not like the trees. Okay, so is that like in the kind of, ooh, that made me uncomfortable, I didn't like, or actually I find this upsetting and distressing, or would have liked to have been briefed on this beforehand? Didn't like. Just like, you know, to get an idea for the kind of things that are sort of borders and boundaries for people. Because, yeah, he likes his evil foam of fungus and slime, that man. Oh, just in that spooky way. Okay, cool, yeah. Yeah, like I said, there's to me, I don't know like in what order the stories were written. I feel like this was probably after some of the short stories that we've already done. But yeah, like there's a lot of a lot of similar sort of stuff. Yes, there's a lot of similar stuff, said the literary critic. There's a I feel like some of those same ideas are coming up again, not in a bad way, not in a you're kind of stuck on this note, ain't you, Hodgson, sort of way. But yeah, things like a tropical horror and Voice in the Night, and those kinds of monsters, those themes, those ideas seem to be coming back, and I'm really interested and curious to see what he does with this. Whether it sort of becomes like a medley version of those stories, like we're gonna, I've established these things and these instances of weird phenomena happening out at sea, so what we're going to do is we're just going to revisit that, but in one continuous story. We're going to send a crew on a hell trip through all these freaky places, or whether there's like a more singular guided point to this narrative, I guess is what I'm curious about. But yeah, I enjoyed that a lot. I feel like I actually enjoyed it more than I was expecting to. So yeah. Wait, I've just realised the picture on the cover of this book. It's an old wooden ship, like masts and rigging and. Excuse me. I ate like 3 hours ago and it's catching up with me now, of course. It's like double printed. I guess it's kind of a ghost story, and there's sort of a ghosted image of the ship, like it's smudged or smeared in printing. Great. You knew that there was a verse in the Quran that fit for those trees. The angels take away the souls of those who defy death. They smite their faces and say, "Taste the punishment of the blazing fire." From the Al-Anfal. Angels saying, "Fire in your face, weirdo face." Here, right, great, yeah, cool. Yeah, I liked those trees. I don't know whether later in the book we go back into more detail about what they are and what's going on there, but I kind of like it as just the trees have faces and they're kind of weird mushroomy flesh trees. Are they the former crew? Like, is this... Because there was a point where I was thinking, like, is this the fate of the people who drink from this spring in a sort of quite straightforward, like, you came and you trespassed upon this island and you sought fresh drinking water and you found it, but you turn into trees if you drink it, like the bird-like protuberance and stuff like that. Or is it just, it's some weird trees, mate, they've got faces and they scream. I'm kind of okay if it never gets elaborated on. The night is dark and full of horrors. Yeah, and I'm trying to think what my position is on horror sounds and like it's a monster in the night kind of narrative, because I guess my broad strokes helpful opinion is if it's done good, then it's good. I feel like there's a lot of ways that can be disappointing or a letdown, and it's not necessarily determined by what the monster is. Like, it can be ordinary or it can be extraordinary, and either of these can be a disappointment if handled badly, I guess, which isn't very good guidance. I need to kind of like think about that and nail it down a little better. The storm bit reminds me of a story about the great-grandfather and his ship. Oh, okay, cool. I mean, for me, it just reminded me of, I think the Voice in the Storm, the other Hodgson one that's... no, Out of the Storm, that's it, sorry, Voice in the Night, Out of the Storm. Which is just the account of someone in a storm recognising, this is the big storm, and, like... getting on the old wireless and tapping out the Morse code signal home, where he is meticulously describing the sheer, unthinkable, hellish horror of what he is witnessing. Excuse me. Is it the metamorphosis that has them on turning a tree? No, the bug. Yeah, the bug. That. I always remember the name. I always forget the name. I remember that I forget the name, and I can't think. Gregor Samsa. That's it. Gregor Samsa awoke one morning and found he'd turned into a bug. Which Wanda Asma, friend of the channel, another lovely reading channel that we have found, has read through recently, which is nice. I think it might be a little bit too like grim, dark, and moody for perhaps myself or Lucy, but who knows? One with a tree though, someone turning into a tree. I don't know that one. I don't think I know that one. The apartment complex he first lived in when he moved to Kentucky got bought by gentrifiers after he moved out, and they put up weird murals on the walls. Yay. And one of them had fish in swings in trees that looked like they're made of flesh. Oh. Every time we drive past it, your wife grumbles about the fish and the flesh trees. That's... yeah, okay. I mean, that I don't know if Guillermo del Toro is looking for like ideas for his next cabinet of curiosities, but that feels like a solid starting point for his kind of thing. Like rich people, like kicking people out and putting up weird haunted murals that will no doubt come back to like tear them apart in their hubris. Yeah, let's go. Yeah, you translating things, bro. Go for it. Sounds rad. Yeah, some creatures in Speaker for the Dead can be planted as trees when they die. Speaker for the Dead. I'm assuming this is a game that I don't know. Andy Pants, you need that episode now? Right, me too. I need to actually watch the rest of that series, but I would have to do so on Netflix, and I dislike Netflix more with each passing day. So that is something of an imp's backside that we are at. Oh, thinking of a Greek myth. Alright. Heliades? Hey ladies. Turning into trees. Great, okay. Right, anyway. I am going to find a channel to raid before everyone that I would raid over to goes offline. Where should we go? Should we go see Billiam? Let's go see Billiam. Billiam is good people. I was thinking of raiding Surge because he's doing a stream watching thing. But yeah, let's go raid Billiam. Billiam's nice. So, thank you all for being here. I will at least try to be back next Saturday. There's no space in the name, so I'm typing correctly. Yeah, I will at least try to be back next Saturday with more of this. In the meantime, I don't have anything off the top of my head for Wednesday. I might try and do like, I've got a lot of short text games and things. Might try and do something for that, possibly. Who knows? But I might also have a fairly busy week, so I will see. I will let you know in the suitable places that you all know where you can find this information. Yeah. As ever, thank you all for being here. You are very much appreciated as an audience. Good, lovely people that you are. And yeah, let's go over and say hello to Billiam. Give him some love, and yeah, look after yourselves and the people around you. And that's the Jerry Springer sign off, isn't it? Oh well. And yeah, we will see you on the next one. Goodbye and good night.